Hey, welcome to the Single Man Podcast. I'm Carlton French, here with my good friend, Tim Vestuto.
When I was in college, struggled with depression on and off. This was the year that I was just feeling like super lonely. Like I started talking to this one girl. She starts becoming like that light in the dark place. And so the only problem with that is that when you're struggling with depression, and not a good time to start dating. A lot of times the magnitude of the breakup isn't by the length of the relationship, it's the magnitude of the intimacy of the relationship. And so to protect myself, it makes sense why you don't do those things, because truly like a part of you becomes attached to that person. It was that moment that I was just like in a super low, and I had to ask myself, like, am I gonna run towards God or away from God? Like I had an internship that summer, and on a piece of paper I wrote down, I will choose to trust you even when I can't see you. Every day I would just put that next to my laptop screen, and I would just look at that. Whenever I'd start having like a panic attack or a freak out, I would look at that. And so just finding opportunities to say that, and then you watch God grow those opportunities. Find the direction that you want to go in life and take every action, every decision towards that person, because eventually like your identity dictates your activity.
Challenge yourself constantly. You have to be a little bit patient.
I felt like I was in a hole looking up.
The whole idea is you have to become content in singleness.
I'd be lying if I said I haven't fired off some Instagram DMs.
The word dating is not mentioned in the Bible.
I dedicated my life at Tomorrow World to Jesus.
Welcome to the Single Man Podcast, where we delve into candid conversations with Christian men about their journey to faith, advice for their younger selves, and navigating dating. With a heart to reach men from all walks of life, dive into real stories of redemption, growth, and the hope found in following Jesus. I'm your host, Carlton French, a 29-year-old single Christian, and I'm excited for you to listen to this week's episode. Let's jump into it. Hey, welcome to the Single Man Podcast. I'm Carlton French, here with my good friend, Tim Vestuto.
Woo!
Tim, how are you doing today, man?
Fantastic. It's a lovely day out here in Atlanta, Georgia, and no complaints here.
No complaints. So thank you so much for coming over. I am excited to have you on and have you share some of your story with the audience today. And it's been awesome getting to know you the last 8 months or so through our church in Atlanta, Passion City Church. And you've been doing such a great job leading a community of single men and women at the church. And I've been able to be a part of it, and I've been really impressed with your leadership and stewardship of that group. And I think your story and kind of how you've gotten to that point to where you even felt led to do that will be really encouraging for single men listening, and how you've been able to navigate your faith and how you've been able to navigate dating, I think will also be encouraging as well.
Absolutely.
So thanks for being here. Let me give a little background on Tim, and then we'll jump into things. So Tim is 27 years old, originally from Chicago, Illinois, and he grew up in church most of his life, all the way from birth until 18. And I think that's really encouraging to hear, like, someone that stayed in the faith pretty much their whole life. I know you'll touch on it more, how you've been able to like get deeper in your faith at different points of your life, but I think that's really encouraging. And then you're single, been single for the last 6 years.
Yes, sir.
Which is awesome, and content being single.
Yeah. Well, now not the whole 6 years, but recently, last 2.
Yeah, there you go. And so single for the majority of your 20s, which is great. I think that'll be a unique perspective to hear, how you've been able to navigate dating and still being single yourself now. So in terms of work, you are an actuary.
I was an actuary.
And now you've been doing real estate.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Very different. 2 very completely separate jobs.
Yeah, which is cool.
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear kind of how you made the change from being an actuary into real estate. And then in terms of hobbies, you played football and ran track in college.
Yep.
At Butler.
Yep.
Yeah.
Go
great.
Bulldogs, the real Bulldogs.
The real Bulldogs. There you go. And really something that you said you're passionate about is you're about to start a program in Chicago at the University of Chicago for your MBA, which I think is really cool.
It's going to be a blast.
Yeah, and you're going to go back and play football.
Yeah, we'll be one of the oldest, if not the oldest, people in the NCAA.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah.
And so just, yeah, awesome. Really encouraged to have you on today, Tim. Anything that I left out you want to touch on?
No, I just appreciate you, letting me be here and just be able to kind of have a stage for me to tell my story. Hopefully it helps somebody out there, and just, again, just use my experience as a place to learn from and not try to reciprocate.
Yeah, so great. In terms of this last week, Tim, what's kind of been a high, what's been a low, just so everyone listening can get to know you a little bit more?
Yeah. We'll start with the lows, so that way we can end with the highs.
There you go.
The low is just, it's the fact that the last week is one of those weeks where it's just like, I've had no downtime. So it's just been like boom, 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 boom. I've had this, I've had that. It's just constant motion. Like I still think it's Monday, but of like last week. And so it's just been, it's been good things. So, thankful for that. But at the end of the day, it's like, I haven't had a chance just to be still.
Yeah.
And then just like be present. And so, that's been tricky, but, so I would say that's been something that's been frustrating. But as for a high, I've had because of the busyness, I've been able to spend time with some of my boys out here in Atlanta, and just being able to really, pour into them, be with them, be present with them, and enjoy kind of like the last couple months before I have to move out. And so that's just been a huge blessing of just like spending quality time with the people that have become like family to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Love that.
Absolutely.
Thanks for making the time to be here today.
Of course. Yeah. Well, I can't say no to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. So for everyone listening, let's kind of jump into your story a little bit, Tim. So I know I said at the beginning, you grew up in church, and that was really kind of ingrained to you when you were a kid. I guess, where did that come from, and when would you say you really had an actual personal relationship with Jesus?
Yeah, great question. So, I come from a Christian household. So, Christian mom, Christian dad. We went to the same church from literally when I was in my mom's womb till when I graduated college. Like just day in, day out, my dad served, my mom served. Like it was just normal to be in the church. And I always thought that made for a lousy testimony, because it's like, nothing exciting, no huge transformation. But along the journey in the relationship with, Christ and God, it's just, I've had my own moments where I've just been able to get a new level of depth, which is almost in a way similar to a transformation. So I know, like, again, I accepted Christ when I was like, 6 or 7, said a prayer, and it was one of those really easy ones. But then when I got to high school, that's when I started seeing the impact that God had, where it wasn't just on my life, but on the people around me. So this church I went to in Chicago, Willow Creek, it's a great church, a lot of opportunities, and they had a high school summer camp that I would go to. And this summer camp, it had 2,000 high schoolers just worshiping Jesus. And so I would bring my friends and just be like, hey, like, this is a really fun summer camp. We have great games and activities and like just really awesome people.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing time. And then like they would come not knowing anything about Jesus, and then they'd give their lives to Christ. And it's like, and then the way that they would live their life was drastically different after that moment. And just to see the tangible response, like, I'm like, okay, maybe this is like legit, this is real. Cause you're always wondering, like, is this really true? And so like you start seeing like other moments in people's lives, and you're like, okay, there's something here. And then, fast forward to another season of life was, when I was in college, and struggled with depression on and off for different varying levels of magnitude on and off throughout those 4 or 5 years or so. And junior year in college was kind of like the lowest of the lows. So this was the year, like, all my friends that I was trying to count on just like kept flaking on me, like in every aspect. This was the year that I broke my leg, and then this was the year that I was just feeling like super lonely. Like at this point, I'd been single for about 3 years. And I was just like, okay, like, that's something that I want to be a part of. And then I started talking to this one girl, and then she starts becoming like that, like, that light in the dark place. And so the only problem with that is that when you're struggling with depression and incredibly like emotionally volatile, not a good time to start dating.
Yeah.
Wish I do that before, but at the same time, it's like when you're kind of in that headspace, you don't really think what's good, what's bad. You just do what feels right in the moment. And so I started pursuing this girl, and that was something that, she's an incredible human being, but just, again, not the right time. So then after processing a lot more, downfalls and things like that, just going through it, just could not commit to her in the sense of like, being there emotionally. And like, I just became like a burden to her that she ended up breaking up with me. And, that devastated me, because when you're already in a sad place and then you break a leg and then, get your heart broken, it's not fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that spiraled me. I mean, it was to the point that like after, every day I was calling my mom and just being like had to regurgitate, like just vomit out all the emotion, all the feeling. And there was one day, like day 33, where like I didn't call my mom. And then she calls me. She's like, hey, like, is everything okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm actually doing all right today. And then I called her the next day and the next day. And then, so, there's a little hope there.
Yeah.
But again, it was that moment that I was just like in a super low, and I had to ask myself, like, am I going to run towards God or away from God? Like, this was like the defining moment. And so I just remember making a conscious decision to pursue God. And so what I did was I was like, okay, God, like, I don't know what you're going to do, but like I wrote that, like I had an internship that summer, and on a piece of paper I wrote down, I will choose to trust you even when I can't see you. And every day I would just put that next to my laptop screen, and I would just look at that. Whenever I'd start having like a panic attack or a freak out, I would look at that and just like, I'm like, God, I have these emotions, but I will surrender them to you and just continue to tell myself, like, I'm going to trust you. I'm going to trust you and make that my choice. And so that was something that sparked a journey of listening to podcasts like 2 to 3 hours a day, just learning like, how do I deal with this emotion? How do I process? How do I look at God's good nature in a moment where it does not feel like he is good? And so it was a lot of processing, and that's when I really started journaling. And so that's something I've been doing the last 6 years now, 5-6 years. And so just to see the growth of, the emotions I experienced then to the emotions I experience now are just completely two different people. So that was another moment where I really experienced God. And I just want to say too about depression. One thing that I struggled with was I never wanted to articulate to people, because I feel like my life wasn't bad. Yeah. So I feel like I had so many good things going for me that I'm like, there's no reason I should feel this way. And so what I did was I would just bottle it up, or I would just make excuses. I wouldn't tell people. But then I realized at the end of it, like, if it's important to you, it's important. And it may not be the first person that you tell that like cares about you, but there is someone out there that cares. And as long as it's important to you, it's going to be important to someone. And so just find that someone to share life with, and those are going to be the people that are in your corner every step of the way. Yeah. So that's something that I had to learn through that. It's just like, as long as it's important to you, it's important enough. Yeah.
So how did you even, thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah.
So how did you even, I don't know, maybe use the words like depression, like, or loneliness, was there something that you were like, this is why I'm feeling this way? Or was it just, okay, maybe I should just use this word to describe how I'm feeling?
Yeah, I mean, again, I say that there was no diagnosis of it. I did study psychology in college, so like obviously there was, they had like, this is that criteria for, mild depression, and I was like, yep, have that. I was like, okay, like, so self-diagnosis, but
okay.
There was not, it was like, a feeling that was exasperated by situational circumstance. So like, breaking my leg during football season, having my heart broken, like those obviously like are not fun things that you deal with, but when you're already kind of just devastated, like those things hit harder.
Yeah.
And so that's where I would say it's hard to articulate. And even now, there's a lot of times where I try to rationalize, like, oh, I wasn't feeling that bad, right? Like, I'm like, okay, I was just making it up. I was just being more emotional or intense in that. But again, I read my journal entries, and it's like months and months and years of just like, torment. And I'm just like, God, like what do I do with the emotion? Like, where do I put this? How do I process this? And it was just a lot of time spent there. So like when I go back even now and just look at that, it's like, no, I really was not in a good place that I wanted to be.
So what kind of helped you get out of that place ultimately?
What got me out of that was just hope. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing. One of the most important things that I've learned in life is to understand like how important it is to understand the character of God. Because when you understand the character of God, it puts everything else that you experience in life into perspective. Because if you understand that God is good and that God is powerful and that God loves you, then everything that you see in this world has a reason. And I hate that saying when they say everything happens for a reason, but there's a lot of truth there.
Yeah.
It's a lot of times, though, it depends how you use that. those circumstances, because sometimes, God God allows storms to happen because there's something that he's trying to cultivate in you during that. Like a lot of times we look at fire like it's a bad thing, but what happens with steel in the fire, right? It gets refined, or it melts and it doesn't, and it just turns soft, right? It really depends on what you use that situation for and how you refine yourself. And a lot of it, it's the intention behind what you're doing. And so that's something that I've learned to be so important in life, is just when you understand the character of God, it puts everything else in perspective, because you understand that God is good, right? So when you're building that foundation on sand or on rock, you're building the same structure, right? It talks about how in the Bible that you have one structure built on rock and one structure built on sand. And when the storms came, the one on sand crumpled and fell. And it's crazy because it's like, you don't go into life, or they didn't go into building that house like expecting like, oh, this house is going to fail. Like they both had the same intention. They both created the same house. And it was the same storm, but only one got destroyed. And it's because a lot of times we're not intentional with where our foundation is. We're not intentional with what we build our lives on. And when that's an eternal perspective and not an earthly perspective, then nothing on earth can disrupt an eternal perspective, because it's eternal, right? It can't be thwarted by physical events. Like if my life or my goal in life was to, like be the best CEO, then like an economic downturn could completely derail all of that. Or, one misunderstanding, or one this or one that, one job firing, and then boom, your history. But if my eternal perspective is to know God, make God known, then no matter what circumstance in life you're going through, no matter what you're dealing with, you can always do that. So, again, understanding the character of God, that God is good, it puts things into perspective, because you understand that the situation that you're in, there's more to it than what meets the eyes. Like we're humans, right? We're very temporal creatures. We only see the near, we only feel the present, all that stuff. So when something bad happens, we think it's bad. We think it's something that's not good. But in reality, God's trying to create something more in us. And I think it's just understanding that perspective, that it's really important to know the character of God, because when you understand that God's powerful and good, that no matter what you're facing through right now, he can make good come from it. It just may not be right now. And it may not be tomorrow. It may not be next week or next year. It may not even be about you. And I think that's what we have to understand, is that God's goal in life is not to make our lives easier, but it's to bring him glory. Because we are created to, we're created by God for God. Like that's what we are best, created for. Yeah. And so just understanding that, I think, has been a huge help in my life.
Yeah. So let's say you could go back and talk to yourself while you were actually going through that. Yeah. Or maybe there's a guy listening, right? And he's going through some difficult situations, a breakup, a physical injury, feeling depressed, feeling like there's no hope, no friends. What maybe would you say to yourself at that point, or guys listening that are going through that, knowing what you know now?
Yeah. I mean, just again, looking back on it, it's the fact that there's what you see in front of you isn't all that there is. Just because you can't think of a good reason doesn't mean there isn't one, right? Like God is a God of miracles. God loves to defy the odds. So like he shows up in ways that you can't fathom. And that should give you hope. And a lot of times it's putting one foot in front of the other, whether you feel like it or not, and to just keep moving forward, but forward with the right direction. A lot of times, you go through pain, you go through trials, and you just want to kind of numb. You just want to, be done, right? So you just kind of like curl up and just like, please wash over me, like just be done. And it's like, no, like it's gonna suck. Like when I made that decision to like, I'm gonna choose to trust you even when I can't see you, like, it was months, it was a year until like it finally like cleared up. But it didn't go away in that instant, but it was like, I'm going to create the right habits that when I look back at this moment, I will be proud of how I handled this situation. And that's the way that I've really tried to look at every action that I take in this moment, where it's like, I'm going through a season I don't love, but how can I respond in a way that 5 years from now, I'll look back and be like, yes, I'm proud of how I handled this.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so encouraging. Hopefully that helps guys out there that maybe you're going through something similar.
It's not fun, but again, that pain creates, it creates action, right? And it's just how you use that action and what direction you take that action.
Yeah. Yeah. So going through the breakup and, now being 27, you've had some time to kind of heal from the breakup, and you've had time to get out of the depression. You said it took about a year. How has your view on dating changed since going through that, and now being 27? How do you kind of approach dating as a single Christian man now?
Yeah. So after that breakup, obviously took some time to just, chill out. Like, was not in a good place to be like making moves with someone else. So I was just like, I'm going to, just take a step back and just try to get through this season as it is, right? And heal and recover and just try to survive the next year. And so then got to a point where it's like, okay, like I'm mentally more or less stable. Let's see what to do next in life. And so it was about this point that I moved to Atlanta. And so graduated college in 2019, and then moved to Atlanta, Georgia for the first time. Didn't know anybody out here.
How old were you when you moved here?
22. So
Okay.
I was 22 when I moved out here. So that was almost 5 years ago.
Yeah.
And I loved it. Great city. Didn't know what to expect, but it's been good to me.
Yeah.
And so I moved out here, and I started going, like, after a little bit, that was when COVID happened. So a lot of things got put on pause and halted. And so at that point I was like, that's probably for the best. Like, this forces me to, like, date Jesus, right? No. But like, just to like work on myself and like get right with God. And so I was like, okay, like I'm in a good place. Like after like a couple years of doing this, I'm like, I've learned to process and journal. So like started getting on the apps and started going on dates. And I was not in a good place in the sense of like, dude, like my emotional state was like being dictated by, did they text me back? Did they not? And just like, did they like me? Did they match with me? Did they give me a follow back? Like, and it was like always top of mind. It was something that, like, again, as being a guy too, it's like, it's almost like a competition.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just the competitive nature side talking, but like, it's just like always like in the back of my mind, how do I get better at this? How do I do this better? And so it's just like, that's how I lived for a couple of years, was just like trying to like, hack the game almost. And just like, how do I figure it out and get to a place where, I win. But
yeah, even as a Christian, like you're consciously like following Jesus. And how does like at that point were you like, Jesus is somehow involved with your dating, or was it kind of like, okay, like I'm gonna do what I think is best?
So when I would approach dating, it was always in the light of like, I want someone that loves Jesus and is actively pursuing him. So I would still go on dates with people because I also love just hearing people's stories too.
Yeah.
And that a date is it's almost like an interview, kind of what we're doing in a sense, where it's like you're just getting to know someone and just see how like God made them. And I'm always interested by that, and it doesn't hurt if they're cute. Right. So I would go on dates and just like hear people's stories and just kind of learn from that. But like I would only actively date. I would only try to pursue people that were actively pursuing God, because I knew at the end of the day, when you're going on the same trajectory together, you're going to grow closer together.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. And so you just never kind of found anybody during that time, or you weren't maybe in the right place yourself to where you were, looking for that at that point?
It took a couple of years. Like, I'm thankful to say, like, after, a couple of years of going through that type of desperate dating almost, where it's like, there's just this longing for, I realized that like my longing was killing my living, like I was so not desperate, but like I just wanted to do life with someone to the degree that it was taking me away from the present and taking away from, here I am, like I have more time, more freedom now than I ever will to do something that's bigger than myself, right? Like, why am I just waiting and dating in this season? Like, why not be active and pursue things that like actually matter, actually make a difference, that are actually like blessing other people, and like give me fulfillment? Because I'm like, I just feel miserable. Like, I'm just like waiting for someone to text me and like just watching TV while doing
another
that.
DM,
Exactly.
Like, another like okay, yeah.
And then you go on the dates and you're like, well, they're not exactly who I thought they were going to be, and like I built them up in my head, and at the same time, I'm like, is this the best way? Like, again, there's so many doubts and things like that. So from that perspective, I was just like, you know what, like, let me just, again, pivot from pursuing a person to pursuing a purpose. And that really changed my outlook on this entire season of singleness.
Yeah. Wow. So when did that happen where you made that switch to purpose?
That was probably about a year and a half ago.
Okay.
A year and a half, 2 years ago at this point, where I was just like, just really stopped, like took a step back from the dating scene in terms of like the apps. Like got rid of, most of them. Yeah. Just, stopped shooting my DM shots over there. But No, it was about 2 years ago, and just really just like surrendering it to God. Like, I believe that God is powerful enough to put someone in my life if that's the will, and that he's good enough to want to do that if that's what's best for me. But like, if he doesn't, then maybe there's a bigger reason why. Like if like the way I always look at it is like, if there was one person whose eternity God wanted to change through me in this season of singleness and delay my marriage by 2-3 years, is that not worth it? To save someone's eternity by me being single just a little bit longer? Like, at the end of the day, that's what matters, right? That's what we're here. Like, my purpose in life isn't to get married and have a family. Like, my purpose in life is to know God, make God known, and to be someone that people can, find Jesus through.
Yeah.
And so if God has me single here for that reason, then why neglect that? Like, that's why Paul says there's so much good about being single, is because you have this time to just have an undistracted devotion to God, where you can consistently pursue him and not have to worry about someone else. And, it's nice to worry about someone else and have someone that worries about you. But at the end of the day, like, if that's not the case right now, that's okay.
Yeah.
And I'm going to be content in that and allow God to move through me in this season or not. Because I believe too that, like, if you're running after God, chances are you're going to find someone running after God, and you're going to pair up and, meet each other and just start running after God together.
Yeah. Making things better together
Exactly.
than it would have been separately, I feel like.
Yeah.
In terms of pursuing Jesus and making him known to people.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think you do a great job of that. Just being honest, like with the group that you're leading for singles now at Passion City Church, and just we're kind of similar in that way where, we have a heart for single people, and, it's interesting, like God put it on your heart to start that group about the same time that he put it on my heart to start this podcast. And, they're like manifestations in different ways, right?
Yeah.
Where this is reaching, single men specifically around the world. And the group that you started is to create community here within Atlanta for singles within the church. So,
and similar names too. I mean, yours is the single man, and this, what we do is single minded,
Yeah, exactly.
Kind of similar concept.
I know. Crazy. So yeah, I mean, I believe God's doing something powerful with single people around the world. And, having people rise up to lead that and like be bold in their singleness, I think is something that is really needed, and specifically for men. So yeah, would love for you to maybe touch a little bit about, single-minded, and maybe there's people listening that, they don't have something like a single community at their church or in their city, maybe like some inspiration for people maybe want to start something like that, or how you even went about it and what it is now.
Yeah. So if you're in Atlanta, if you're single, love the church community, we'd love to see you, meet every other Tuesday.
Yeah.
Had to give a shout out.
Yeah. What's the Instagram?
It's single-minded, but the I is a 1 because it was already taken.
Yeah.
But
there you go. We'll put it in the description.
there we go. There we go. Oh, my man. But no, it's funny because I never expected myself to, be that type of person to start a singles group.
Yeah.
And it really, again, to the point where I found this, like, I felt this desperation in dating where I was like, man, I feel like I'm just wasting part of my life just waiting for someone. That I was like, 3 years have gone by, and like I've gone on dates, but like outside of work and some other stuff, like what have I really done to, build the kingdom of God and to like just bless other people, like just to be a light, like in a world that just isn't great all the time.
Yeah.
And so it's just trying to help other people experience that change, that pivot from pursuing a person to pursuing a purpose, and just to have tranquility in that. And so it's funny because like a lot of times when I meet people, they're like, oh, you're so like extrovert, you love people. And it's like, I'm an introvert by nature. Like I would always talk to myself more than I talk to anybody else. Like I would have my mom order for me at the restaurants. Like I would, like in college, like if a conversation lasted more than like 30 seconds with someone I didn't know, like it would just like awkwardly like kind of like be like, cool,
Yeah.
wild, like that's crazy, like it would just get awkward. And so like at that point, like I realized like, our goal in life is like to love people well. And it's like, well, in order to love people well, you have to be able to talk to people. Like you have to conversate with people. So I was like, all right, how do you have conversations? So like, you go where anyone else goes, you go to YouTube. And so you Google like, so I YouTube like how to talk to people, right? And I would watch videos like how to sound interesting, like how to ask questions, like how to story tell. And I was like, okay, like I would take notes and I would learn and then I would practice. Like I would write down questions. So if I was going to a dinner with friends or like hanging out with people that I kind of knew, like I would have questions ready that like I would be able to ask that would drive the conversation a little bit deeper. And like, you know, if I asked this question and follow up with this question, I would lay it all out. I would have responses on the ready. So like if someone was like, oh, how was work? I could tell them like a story about work. Or I would have like a cool project that I was working on that like actually sounded interesting instead of saying just like, good.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, next topic. Like, you know, it's like having substance there.
Yeah.
And I would learn to story tell, because that's so important, of learning how to tell a good story, be comfortable with, you know, setting up the way that it goes and trying to build humor into it and have fun with it.
Yeah.
And so I would do all that, and then I would rehearse it. And so I would talk to myself all the time, you know, well, what's new, right? That's what I was doing before.
Yeah.
But now like it was structured, and now I would, you know, talk to myself on a car ride to these places. I would talk to myself in the room. I would practice, you know, in the shower. Like I would be just talking and asking these questions and asking or having these responses all the time. So by the time I actually used it, it was like the 13th time that I've used it. And so like I felt much more comfortable. I felt more relaxed, and I felt like I could actually drive the conversation forward. So I would do that time after time, week after week, month after month. And after years of doing that, like I've become a lot better.
Yeah.
And so then I would use that kind of like skills from that to like, I started leading high schoolers, then I started leading, you know, men, and then I started having opportunities at FCA, the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, to start talking and sharing like my story and some things that I've learned in life.
Yeah.
And so that allowed me to hone the skills necessary, because then I was reading Tim Keller's Meaning of Marriage. Even though I'm single, like that's a incredible book to read, because it teaches you, you know, what the final goal of marriage is. And a lot of time there's no such thing as, you know, marriage problems. It's single people problems you bring into marriage, right?
Right.
And so it's learning how to be aware of that. So I'm reading through this, and I get to page 262, and he talks about how the singles community in the church is like overlooked, and how like not a lot of people target it, and it's just kind of like, okay, like just, you know, get married, then we'll talk. And
Yeah. Right.
he's like, that's not how it should be. And he's like, I would encourage the reader, whoever that may be, to take it upon themselves to do something. And so like, that hit hard, because I just, you know, left my corporate job as an actuary. So now I was working as a real estate agent, and you have all the flexibility in the world. So I'm like, I was like, God, okay, maybe there's something here. And like, I'm not the funniest guy in the world. I can't talk the best. Like I'm still like, you know, I still have a social battery and like can be like very introverted, but I was like, I'm a lot better than where I was. If this can even help one person, let me take a risk on it, right? Let me see what happens. And so, you know, I pitched it to Passion. They're like, hey, go for it. And after 8 months now, you know, of meeting every other week, we have, you know, over 250 people that have, you know, come through it.
Yeah.
About 50 to 60 every single time that we meet. And just like, again, never would have expected that. That was never like my intention with like, oh, what's my purpose in life? Like, what does God want me to do? It was like, just by saying yeses to the smaller things and allowing myself to continue to pursue who God wants me to be and what God wants me to do, that opportunity came about, and I was equipped enough to actually do something about it.
Yeah. So great, man.
Yeah. No, it's wild. Honestly, still wild to think about.
Yeah. Y'all are crushing it. I
It's
I
a
love
team
it.
effort.
I love
That's
it.
all I could say.
I love going, just, you know, pouring out in other areas of life. It's nice to just show up and, you know, get poured into myself. And I think that's important, you know, areas where you're getting poured into, areas where you're pouring out
Exactly.
as a Christian. And so, love how encouraging you've been. And you always do a great job personally texting me like, hey, we'd love to have you come every week. It's really inspiring. So just keep up the great work, and hopefully that encourages, you know, listeners to maybe start something like that, you know, in their own church or in their own city and community.
And I'll say too, like you don't always have to start big. Like, I mean, sometimes it's just starting small, and just like basically like, okay, who does God want me to be, or what do I want to do, right? And what's one step that I can take in that direction? And like, again, that whole story took place over like 2-3 years, like that allowed for me to be in that position. Like that's not something that I just woke up one day and had the opportunity. It was like, let me just slowly start pursuing the direction that I know I should be pursuing. And then as you do that, you start to see opportunities open up. And so that's all I'll say, is just continue to pursue the direction that you know you should, and then look for opportunities, because they're out there, and man, God can do something wild if you just say yes.
Yeah. The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few, right? Mm-hmm. So Tim, this being the Single Man podcast, we talk about guys' dating histories and dating stories. how's kind of your dating story evolved over your 27 years of life?
It's been a roller coaster. First girlfriend. Wow. So I've dated 2 girls, one in high school, one in college. I haven't had a girlfriend since college, but in high school, dated a girl for 4 years, and at first fantastic, and then something happened where it's just like not the same person anymore, and it was the wildest thing. But that one was really tough because this was a girl that I'd for the first year and a half, like I'd come to really enjoy and just adore and just admire, and then just to see her be a different person was wild. And I wish I could say that I ended the relationship there, but we dated about 2 years after that.
Wow.
And then broke up, and a lot of that hurt did not heal from. And so a couple years later, started dating a girl in college and saw a lot of that pain, a lot of that hurt, a lot of that emotional trauma kind of come up again. And it was just one of those things where it's like, I thought I had done a good job healing, but until I got into that position again, I realized there was still a long way to go. And again, this was going and hand in hand with struggling with depression and just high highs and low lows, and just didn't know how to handle that. And so that relationship ended before it started. And I think a contributor is the fact that we had done some stuff physically that probably shouldn't have. I've never had sex. That's something that I truly am trying to wait, but there are things that are gray areas of sorts, and it's one of those things where just understanding hindsight, just the impact that even that has on a relationship is wild. Understanding the science and the release of oxytocin, right? Like a lot of times the magnitude of the breakup isn't by the length of the breakup, or the length of the relationship, it's the magnitude of the intimacy of the relationship, and how much time you spent together and how close you got, and things of that nature. And so to protect myself, it makes sense why you don't do those things, because truly a part of you becomes attached to that person. And so that's really kind of dictated the way that I've, lived kind of my life since then. And just the last 6 years, furthest I've gone is kissing a girl, right? And just allowing myself to understand, there's more to life than just that aspect, and to protect, and knowing the reason is, for my benefit at the end of the day. And at the same time, for my wife's benefit, because one day, I'll have to approach her and be like, hey, if I slept with a lot of people, I'd be like, hey, these are all the people I slept with, right? This is my baggage, or the where I'm coming from. But the fact that hey, it's just me and you, that completely changes the dynamics of the relationship and the trust.
I've waited for this relationship.
Exactly.
I've waited for you. Yeah, that's awesome.
And so I've realized the importance of that. And obviously it's a little weird to some people or countercultural, but at the end of the day, it's a lot of things that you want to do impulsively aren't good for you, right? Eating all the junk food, or doing drugs, right? They give a temporary high, but that's a lot of times they don't really solve the issue of loneliness or fatigue or hopelessness and things of that nature. And so being able to understand that and move forward from a position of I'm gonna just again choose to trust you even when I can't see you, there's a part of me that wants to do it, of course, right? We're wired that way,
right?
But in the right and proper context. And so it's just allowing myself the grace to know that that context is not yet here.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. Thank you for being vulnerable and sharing. I hope that encourages the listeners that you've not been perfect, but you're waiting till marriage. And I think that men and women listening, that'll be almost surprising to hear wow, this guy is so successful and has been waiting, and he's 27. I feel that's something that's just not talked about in culture at all,
Yeah. It's one of those things too that community really plays a role into it too. Being around like-minded people that are also pursuing the same trajectory as you is crazy.
Yeah. So great, man.
Yeah.
So for this, season of life, or just your life in general, has there been maybe a Bible verse that you've had top of mind? 27, about to head to get your MBA at University of Chicago, this great community. What's kind of been a verse maybe that God's had on your heart recently?
So the verse that there's a few, but one of the verses that I pray probably every night is, or I try to, is Psalm 143:10, which is, teach me to do your will, O Lord, for you are my God. May your gracious spirit lead me forward on a firm footing. And so the reason why I love that is because a lot of times in life we're like, God, give me patience, right? God, give me wisdom. God, give me this. God, give me that. And it's like, teach me to do your will, right? Like you don't, when you go fishing, it's like, right, you don't want to just give them fish. You want to teach them how to fish, right? It's the same concept where it's like, I want to be taught how to pursue God's will.
Yeah.
I want to learn day in and day out how to do it better. And I think that's something that it's like, yes, God, show me your will. Like, what is your will? But it's like, teach me how to do your will.
Yeah.
Teach me so I don't even have to ask because I know. It's something that it's been ingrained in me that I can see your character of God. And so I know what you want me to decide because I'm so in line with you. And so again, I love that aspect of, teach me because you are my God, right? It's like, that's the why behind it. It's like, because you're my God, you're my Lord, you're my Savior. You died for me. You gave me freedom. So I want to repay you back with that. And then may your gracious spirit lead me forward on firm footing. And it's like, okay, so how does God teach me to do his will? Well, his spirit guiding me forward on a firm footing. And a lot of times, like when the spirit lead, like in the song Oceans, right? It's like, lead me where my trust is without borders. It's like the spirit will lead you where your trust is without borders, which is scary, but he leads you on a firm footing. Because if you're walking in God's will, you have the God of the universe on your side blessing you. And that's what I think is wild. Like, it's like, it doesn't always look how you want. Like the picture is not always pretty, but if you're in God's will, then you have a God of the universe on your side that can like clear up storms in an instant, move mountains at the snap of the fingers. And like, to me, that's wild.
Yeah.
And that gives me so much confidence. And I think especially with faith, like it takes faith to have faith. And that's something that it can be scary, but it's a muscle that you flex, right? And so you have to find ways to like be like, God, I'm gonna put my trust in you, and just take that step. And then you start to see God be faithful. And that gives you more faith because you're like, I've seen God come through in A, B, and C. And you've seen God come through in A, B, C, D, and E. And now you've seen God come through A through Z. And now you're going on to A, B, You just start to see ways that God shows up and that increases your faith. And so that's just been something that's been, that this verse I feel like really encapsulates and really kind of just ties it back where it's like, just God, teach me to do your will.
Yeah. Love that verse.
Yeah.
That's
it's
awesome.
a good one. It's a good one.
Thanks for sharing that. So last thing, we'll wrap up with this, Tim. Let's say someone has been listening the whole episode, right? Friday afternoon, at work, they're about to go into the weekend. Single men specifically that are listening, what maybe would you want them to take a note or, okay, write this down, put this into my iPhone reminder heading into the weekend? One piece of wisdom from Tim.
One piece? Just kidding. That's a great question. I think ultimately the thing that just kind of has helped me is just to find the direction that you want to go in life and just start saying yes to that. To be that person that, to just identify who do I want to be and take every action, every decision towards that person. Because eventually, like, your identity dictates your activity, right? So who you are, you'll see those actions be a result of who you are, but it starts with the change in identity.
Yeah.
And so as long as you continue to just be like, who do I want to be? That's the person I'm going to be, and just act that way, like that will construct who you are. And it's just saying, like I said earlier, that you want to say yes to God. Like, you want to have those yeses where you're just like, God, I love you and I'm going to pursue you. And like, I have no idea why this is here, but I'm going to just say yes to it because I get to, it either makes you known or, helps me know you better, right? And so just finding opportunities to say that, and then you watch God grow those opportunities. You watch them become bigger and bigger. Those stages become bigger and bigger, and you see God move in bigger and bigger ways. And you're like, holy crap, this is real. Like, this is exciting. It's scary. It's weird. Like, I don't know what to make of it, but it's that concept that just like, sometimes just starting small and allowing God to come in is the difference maker. It's, God doesn't care about your ability. He cares about your obedience. And that's where he always starts.
Yeah. Like the principle of the talents. That's one of my favorite parables in the Bible, where God will give you some ability to steward something.
Yeah.
And, okay. How do you do with that small thing? Usually, right, you're not going to just jump in and start a whole singles ministry with 250 people with no experience talking to someone before, right? In your life. So yeah, I think your story is really encouraging and inspiring, and how you've been able to take these small steps and now to see where God has you is really awesome, man. So,
well, and I mean, just real quick to, piggyback off that, like with the talents, like, in this season of singleness, like you have an opportunity. God, like, it's the gift of singleness, right? You have an opportunity to do something with it.
Yeah.
In that parable, like the one that got one just buried his and was like, well, I kept it safe for you, right? And he didn't do anything in that season. Like sometimes that's how I look at, that's what terrifies me in this season, where it's like, what if God at the end of my life was like, hey, Tim, this is what I want you to do in your singleness, right? Like he's like, I want you to start this singles group. I want you to do this. I want you to do that. And like that whole time I just spent going on dates, right? And just being like, woe is me, I have no dates, or, going on one that I shouldn't, and all that stuff. And just having the wrong perception of that season. And so that's why I love that parable too, because it's at the end of the day, it's like God has given you a gift, steward it well, and watch him multiply it.
Yeah. So great, Tim. Thank you so much for coming on.
Absolutely.
And sharing your story.
Yeah,
I hope it encouraged everyone listening. And if it did, I'd love for you to text the link to a friend of yours. Tell them, hey, check out the Single Man podcast. Check out today's episode with Tim. I think it'll really encourage you. And I hope you have a great rest of your Friday. We'll see you back next week for another new episode. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of the Single Man podcast. If someone you know would benefit from this week's episode, I'd love for you to text them the link and invite them to listen. You never know how a simple invitation could change someone's life. We'll be back next Friday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, with a new episode. Until then, check out the video version of the podcast on YouTube, and you can engage with us on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook.